Hi there, I'm Jim.
I'm Dana.
And I'm Claire.
Let's talk teaching. Welcome to Let's Talk Teaching, a podcast from the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology here at Illinois State University. I'm Jim G. Joining me today, two of my colleagues here at CTLT. Dana Carricker is a coordinator for faculty development. Hi, Dana.
Hello.
And our director returns, Claire LaMonica.
Hi, Jim. Hi, Dana.
Hello.
Hello. Wow, it's all three of us. This is the first time we're recording three of us at once, I think.
Jim got new equipment, and he's so excited.
I am so...
It's like, wow, look, I have 3 microphones.
Well, actually, it was a while ago, but I was feeling guilty that we haven't used them all yet. But we also have something to talk about today that both of you can provide some perspective on. So today we want to talk about the theme for our 2018 Teaching and Learning Symposium that's coming up. And this is an annual event we have here on campus. So Claire, to start with you, what's kind of the history behind the symposium and what's the aim of it all?
The aim of the Teaching and Learning Symposium is to give our campus community a chance to gather in one place and talk about teaching and learning on our campus. So I always refer to it as the largest single conversation about teaching and learning to happen every year at Illinois State University. And to that end, it's been going on since before I came to CTLT, since before there was a CTLT. Mm-hmm. So the Center for the Advancement of Teaching was organizing teaching symposia for a number of years before I ever came on board. So one year we billed ourselves as like the 10th annual, and everybody was like, oh, no, it's much older than that. So it was like, okay, we're not numbering anymore. So
that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And Dana, this year you're kind of taking the lead on getting the symposium organized.
Right.
So what does that conversation look like throughout the day?
We have a theme every year, which we're going to talk about during this podcast. One of the conversations is faculty submit proposals to present either panels or individual presentations or posters. And so those are breakout sessions where they're sharing their promising teaching practices. And those promising teaching practices, often the proposals for those often build on our theme. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that happens. We also have keynotes that come. We have a nationally recognized keynote every year. Mm-hmm. This year we have 2, which I'll be telling you about soon as well. And they do a morning 75-minute workshop, then do a keynote at lunchtime, and then have a continuing conversation, which just opens up an opportunity to talk more about the topic. And then we have a poster session at the end of the day.
And the
we
reception.
Also have, there's a reception and an idea cafe. So we start the morning with an idea cafe, which is just roundtable discussions for people to ease into the morning, talk about several topics that they might be interested in. This year we're talking about challenging misconceptions around identities of international students will be one. Using literature circles to encourage discussions of social issues is another. So that's just kind of a way to have more informal conversation. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the day, with our poster session, we have a reception. So that's just kind of a celebratory way to end the day and go around and view posters and listen to those poster presentations.
And kind of a way to ease out of the day.
We
ease into the day and then we ease out of the day. So
yes.
And easing out comes with wine.
This is true.
I don't know if I can say that.
Yeah. Well, I think we can say that.
Okay.
We can edit it out if we can't say that.
No, I think we can say that.
We can say that.
No.
Yeah, it's.
If we were saying we were drinking wine now, I think it'd be more problematic. But no, I don't think it's.
Yeah, that would be against some rule.
We would. At least we wouldn't admit to it. So it's a big day. So that's the nuts and bolts of the symposium. That's great. But I'm really excited about this year's theme, which is
expanding notions of literacy.
We had a lot of proposals that kind of really fall into this. What does expanding notions of literacy mean to you?
Okay, it means a couple of things. So in our digital age, the ways we interact with text and communication is expanding. So we have different modes in order to communicate our messages or even receive our messages. And then the other one is, as literate beings, we have to expand our notions of literacy, our understandings of how we interact in the world as well.
Because that makes sense, because we're doing things differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I communicate with people differently than I used to. I used to get a phone call, and now I get a text message, or I used to get a letter, and now I get an email. And in fact, I'm encouraged to do this, to stop getting paper and stuff like that.
Well, and I think also thinking beyond literacy as simply reading and writing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we need to be literate in a lot of ways and in a lot of fields, a lot of disciplines, as well as in sort of our social lives. So I have a great nephew who over the weekend over the Thanksgiving weekend saw me shuffling a deck of cards and said, "Oh, you're randomizing," which was awesome. He's 9 years old. And I was like, I absolutely am. When we're playing cards, we call this shuffling. And so he knew the word randomizing. He didn't know the word shuffling. So, you know, it worked in one context, but if he wants to be literate in the world of card playing, he needs to know the word shuffling.
So what you've just described there is this navigating of social spaces and how we have to adjust our ways of being to fit those contexts. So, and in that case, he had an idea, but his vocabulary for it was randomizing, and yours was shuffling.
And mine was shuffling. Yeah.
Right.
And I had never thought of shuffling as randomizing. So I thought it was actually pretty cool when he applied. I mean, because that's, of course, exactly what I'm doing.
And it could be then that there's something that he is literate in where randomizing is the term that you would use.
Clearly.
That there, probably something on a smartphone, I'm guessing.
Something
There's
in which
some game.
I am not literate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some context in which
Yeah.
I am illiterate.
Exactly.
Yes.
So literacy and these notions of literacy pervade all of us, all of our disciplines. But we don't usually sit around and talk about them in terms of literacy unless perhaps our discipline is specific to education. So, like in communication, we would be talking about schema and all this other stuff. But what we're really talking about here are, like you said, literacies beyond reading and writing. So the idea of expanding notions at our symposium, what are some of the topics that have been proposed that will be covered at the symposium that kind of break open this idea of literacy?
Well, there's nothing like the past year, our last socio-political environment that really opens up this need for having a conversation about literacies. So we have a session on fake news in the post-truth world. So enhancing 21st century news literacy. So how do we navigate those spaces, and what literacies do we need in order to fully understand what's happening there? Oh, we have Milner Library is doing several. I think this just kind of opened up a nice forum for them.
It appealed to them.
Right, yes. So they're doing a session on how to use the archives in your classes, pop culture, and using pop culture in your courses, educating students through accessible media. Now that we are moving into online spaces, we have to think about how people interact in those spaces and what supports some people might need, how technology can make information accessible to people that may not have had that information beforehand. Preparing civically engaged graduates, so that's part of it too. So a lot of different ones. So,
and I think, what is attractive about this for me is that we are talking about technology, but we're not doing the gadget show.
Yep,
this isn't, Claire, you and I have talked a lot about our name here is Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology, and people think we're just IT support. And while we do something kind of tangential to that, it's really more about the thought and the pedagogy behind using that technology.
Right. Why are we using that technology?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that in itself is a kind of pedagogical literacy.
Right.
Is the ability to select to identify a desire or a problem and select a technology that will allow you to address that, and then to use it, to become conversant with the technology in a way that allows you to use it in effective ways in your teaching.
Well, and for many, many years now, we've been talking about digital natives. And Claire, you and I in past episodes have talked about the misconception that they are all excellent computer users because they grew up with a computer in their crib or something like that, or next to the crib. But it really, I think, this idea of literacies. Dana, I'm getting a nod from Dana here. This idea of literacies, I guess, is the fact that these digital natives have grown up with different literacies at their disposal.
And some of those literacy skills that they have and are very efficient using don't translate into other contexts.
Right.
So what I think we want faculty to start thinking about is their own literacies in their own disciplines, because each discipline, has their own. How do you read, write, and communicate as a philosopher, as a biologist, as a information technology person? So they all have very different ways of doing. And when our students come to us, they don't always know what that is and think they can bring a particular set of tools from another area of their life into this one, and that doesn't always work for them. So when we're experts in our own field, those literacies just come as second nature. We don't really think about how we are interacting with our text, how we're writing, how we're speaking. So we have to kind of think about that in our own disciplines, those nuanced skills for our own disciplines.
I think nuance is a really good way of putting it. It's not something you can necessarily just pick up a book and, of course, and that's one type of literacy. So it may not work for everyone to begin with. So, before we get on to talk about the keynote speaker and whatnot, which obviously is related to all this, Claire, the faculty members you talk to after a symposium, when they come and talk to you and say, "Hey, I had a really good time," we'll concentrate on those conversations.
Yeah. Okay.
What
Which
did they?
is the bulk of the conversations.
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
You know, we do surveys and we get a lot of feedback. And I think the stuff that we've adjusted over the years have been more procedural things about how the day goes, how we print up the schedule, that sort of thing. But as far as people who actually get something meaningful out of a symposium, what are they doing? What should they bring metaphorically to the symposium?
Well, I think the first thing you have to bring is an open mind or an inquiring mind, but also just a willingness to connect with colleagues beyond your discipline primarily. But also, a lot of times, interestingly, this is a great day. I mean, we have just this plethora of breakout sessions and all of these different activities going on. And frequently people say to me that it's the hallway conversations that actually bring about that spur them to action in some ways. And I think often those hallway conversations are spurred by sessions that they've been in. But we often hear about people who had a hallway conversation with a colleague, and that led to some change in their teaching, or it led to a partnership, a collaboration of some form. So, people really do appreciate that chance to talk to each other, to get outside their own disciplines. And I think in this chance to really explore other literacies. We tend to say, students can't read and write. Their papers have emojis in them, or they're using text speak or whatever. So, what we don't think about is that as a separate literacy. So, somebody like me who uses semicolons in texts is really sort of a laughing stock, for people who are more so for my children, for people who are more natural to the world, that texting is a more natural form for them. Right. And so,
so you're putting semicolons in your text?
I am. Is that what we're confessing? Semicolon in my texts. Yes, I do.
The other James G. would have something to say about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll have to talk about that in a moment, too. Yeah. I'll have to,
So, it's just a matter of, realizing that it's trying to take something that's familiar to you and bring it into an unfamiliar context, and it's not a good fit. And it wouldn't be a good fit going the other direction either.
Right.
So, this is expanding our own minds to take in these ideas that, this student who's an English major is not doing well in her accounting class. I don't know why an English major would be taking an accounting class, but they might be, if they are thinking of opening a small business or whatever.
Sure.
Because there are these different, you have to write in a completely different way in an accounting class than you do in an English class. So.
What you're describing is called capital D discourse.
Oh,
So,
thank you very much.
And I know that the segue into talking about who our keynote speakers are, because
Right.
Yes.
and I think these keynote speakers are going to be, I think they will also be spawning a lot of those hallway conversations.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Dana, tell us about them.
All right. So we are very excited to have William Cope and Mary Kalantzis. They are now at the University of Illinois, and they're in their School of Education policy. And the two of them are architects of one of the seminal works on multiliteracies, which is called Pedagogy of Multiliteracies, Designing Social Futures. So they were in the New London group who put that work together back in the late 90s.
And you kind of alluded to before. So when this comes up on a Google search, because we're talking about new literacies, and my name is Jim G. I'm not that Jim G. You know, I go to when we were at Pod a couple weeks ago. We were in Canada at the national conference, and someone said, "Are you?" And I said, "No." So I am not the Jim G. who is James G. Does he go by James? I think he goes by Jim. I don't know. But anyway, doesn't matter. Well, he's Jim to me. So,
and he's James to me.
Yeah. Well, and we have the same middle name too, so that's even
James
confusing.
P.
Yeah, James PG. Yeah. Anyway, so I am not he.
No.
So anyway, but they'll be giving the keynote speech at lunch, and then there's a continuing the conversation afterwards. So that and of course they're doing the morning workshop as well.
Multiliteracies, Meaning Making and Literacy Learning in an Era of Digital Text is their morning workshop.
Okay.
And then at lunch, they're going to be talking about Big Data Comes to School, Implications for Learning, Assessment, and Research. And they are going to frame that in writing. And they say because writing is significant not only because it is central to the core subject area of literacy, it's also an ideal medium for representation of deep disciplinary knowledge across a number of subject areas. So
writing across the curriculum. Oh, we just got a yay rah from Claire. Claire, just don't drop the microphone, please.
That would be Dana. Mic drop.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So we will have all of that up on our website very soon, and we will link that to the show page. And if you go to our website, you can. It's kind of hard to miss information about the symposium at this time of year. We also should kind of mention that there is a deadline to register for the symposium. It is December 15th. It is coming right up. To register, you can go to ctlt.illinoisstate.edu, and the symposium itself is Wednesday, January 10th, 2018, and we hope to see as many members of the ISU community there. By the way, this is not just for faculty, it's also for staff.
Right.
And graduate students. I think we can seat about 400 for lunch, right?
Yeah, we can seat about 400 for lunch, so, and we generally do.
All right. Dana, Claire, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim.
And that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Let's Talk Teaching. You can find out more about our symposium by going to our website, ctlt.illinoisstate.edu. You can also find out more about this podcast. Just click the podcast link in the upper right of the page. For Dana Carricker and for Claire LaMonica and all of my colleagues here at the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology, until we talk again, happy teaching.